The Kray twins as boxers. We're going to look at fact, we're going to look at fiction, and in the middle I'll try and make out whether they were any good or whether they were, to quote one or two people, absolutely rubbish.
Proper boxers, not round the corner and having a swift punch.
Well, let's try and get to the bottom of it, because everyone talks about the Krays being boxers.
Yeah.
There are pictures of them in the Repton gym in East London where they grew up in Bethnal Green. And they actually boxed. Let's get that right. When they were 11 and 12 and 13, their old dad took them to the boxing gym, the Repton. First of all, we took them to a gym in South London, not many people know this, called the Robert Browning. And it was in the Walworth Road, basically between Camberwell and the Elephant and Castle, the Robert Browning. A great old club, sadly vanished about 25 years ago. So they went there first, long slap from Bethnal Green. They went back to the Repton, all in green, a boxing club set up in the 19th century by Repton School up in Staffordshire as a philanthropic venture into the East End. It was a way of reaching people in the slums with a sort of mission. Basically, it was a mission. Instead of going to India, Bush, or darkest Africa, you go to the East End, 19th century. So it's called Repton. And they went there and started boxing, 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age. They both managed to win the Hackney schools, and they both managed to win the London schools. And Ronnie, who was the better of the two, he managed to get to the National Schoolboy Finals, I think, in 1948. So we know they've got a bit of form, if you'll excuse the expression, because later on they get plenty of form, as you well and truly know. So they did box, okay? And let's deal with that. They did box as amateur boxers when they were teenagers. And then they both decided when they were, I think, 18, that they'd turn professional. Now, this is a totally different thing, and this is where the myth starts to take over, and whether or not Ronnie and Reggie could actually box, or whether they were both rubbish, or one of them was rubbish, or what. So let's have a look at the raw stats and the raw facts. They both turned professional at the same time, July 1951.
What did professional mean then?
That meant they took off their vest, and they actually they had to have a medical, and they fought on professional bills, so all around. Although they managed to fight in some fantastic locations. I mean, as you can imagine, they fought at places like Hoxton Town Hall and Lime Grove Baths. I mean, places that are now completely extinct because people don't need to go and have a... That's why they're called baths, because there were baths in them.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you lived in a slum, you queued up on a Saturday morning or a Friday night and you got in a bath water, you've seen Quadrophenia, and you start singing and you have someone throw hot water in, more hot in number 4, and over it would come. And that is actually true. So they did this short career, lasted about 7 months. And the raw stats are quite simple, to be perfectly honest with you. Ronnie himself had 6 fights. He won 4, he lost 2. He was described by someone that knows him very well, a man called Tony Burns, who runs the Repton gym. He was described as a crank. In fact, the quote that Burnsy told me back in the 1980s was quite simple. Ronnie, and he went quiet, Burnsy, pulled on a cigarette, he was a crank. So I said, what about Reggie? So Reggie, no, he could box a bit. Oh, but only a little bit. Now, Reggie's professional record was 7 wins and no defeats. So, in all fairness, it's not that bad. They were there. But they were only 18 or 19 years of age at that particular time. But what they were already starting to do then was create this myth around themselves. By the time they were 18, 19, 20, they were having skirmishes, repeated skirmishes, and they were associating with boxing people. And somewhere between these associations and that little bit of professional boxing, 6 and 7 fights, this myth of what they could have become. So if you read one book by all of the different members, I mean, you know, the Kray gang, well, I don't know how many people are actually in the Kray gang, but there are at least 60 or 70 books out there by members of the Kray gang. I mean, how they weren't arrested earlier, in all fairness, there's 72 men walking down the street with broad-creamed hair and suits on, for God's sake. I mean, they couldn't have been hard to find.
But who's pumping that out? Is that them?
Well, it's a bit them, and it's a bit people very willing in the late 70s, late 70s, early 80s, and even 90s, just churning out constantly these books. The boys were not bothered. You know, the twins at this stage are well and truly ensconced in prison, walking around in Armani suits with the best sound systems in their prison rooms, listening to Mozart and Handel and stuff. I mean, it's just a ridiculous life. So let's get back to this mid-50s to late 50s, and they're so-called great boxing careers. It lasted 7 months in 1951. 7 months. One had 6 fights, one had 7 fights. And what's happened? And I was with someone last weekend, a kid called Joey Pyle Jr., whose dad was called Joey Pyle Sr., I suppose. And Joey Pyle ran with the Krays and was acquitted of a couple of murders and was associated with them quite heavily, and may or may not have supplied this gun, or may not have supplied this knife that was used in various murders that ended up sending the 2 twins to prison until they died. And Joey Pyle Jr. said to me, and bear in mind his father, I think, carried at least one of the coffins, maybe both. And Joey Pyle Jr. said to me that, he said, Steve, have you found all the fake stuff online? I said, yeah. I said, Joe, what's the story with that? He said, no one knows. So there are all these fake boxing posters. So they're made to look real. So it looks like they're so it's Ronnie Kray and there's some geezer called Sid Johnson or Sid Smith. And it'll be a Manor Place bar. So they use real venues, Royal Albert Hall. And they'll have Reggie or Ronnie's record as 57-0, 57 knockouts. Now what's happened over the years is that the advent of better record books and the computers and the various websites where you can check records. So those posters in the 60s, 70s and 80s would have sold as originals because it was near enough impossible, because they would have been boxing so far down an undercard they wouldn't have made the national press. So if in 1962 there's a poster that says they were boxing and it was 57-0, you have no way of checking it. The fact is it's complete and utter invention, and these are still selling to this day. You go onto eBay and other reputable places, you can buy these ridiculous fake boxing posters with their records. So what happens is, if you speak to people that even know a little bit about, let's say, boxing and London and the Krays, they all think they had 50, 60, 70 fights. They didn't. They had 6, and the other one had 7. It's really that simple. So forget all those ridiculous fake records. And of course, then what adds to the myth is that you have Reggie walking around. Now, Reggie is the one who was he was the better boxer, and he was, in theory, the sort of semi-sensible one, but and he's the one that didn't get diagnosed as being certifiably criminally insane, paranoid schizophrenic, which was what happened to Ronnie. There's a fine line, though, between what Reggie was and what Ronnie was. That's obviously for sure. But Reggie's wandering around talking about, I broke at least 11 jaws. So they built their own myth, I suppose, is exactly what they do. Now, one way of looking at this, okay, if you want to be perfectly honest, is to get some testimony from men that were around them. So let's deal with Mickey Duff. Okay, Mickey Duff boxed in the 30s and the 40s, promoted in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and he knew inadvertently the Krays. He'd actually matched a couple of them. And what he said, and this again in conversation with me, basically, this is not basically what he said. His exact quote to me was, they were both useless boxers, they were, especially Ronnie. He said, I used to look for the biggest cripples in the world for him to fight. Now, bear in mind, this interview took place in the early to mid-90s, so it's not necessarily particularly PC. But that didn't go unnoticed. And Mickey Duff, when he refused the twins access to his national sporting club in the Hilton in London in the 60s, and he went out to meet with them, and he explained, look, fellas, I've got some people there, and you're quite notorious at this stage. You can't come in, even though you've got this great association with boxing. So he refused them access. And then Mickey was a fight in America, an Ali fight in America, and his wife received through the post 4 dead rats. In fact, it's not the first story where dead rats arriving through the post or through the window. Anyway, so she received 4 dead rats through the window. And in fact, when he was arrested, this is an absolute true story, when Ronnie was arrested, okay, he had in his pocket, you'll love this, a list, okay, and in this list, this is how arrogant they were, right? Now listen, so they're killing people left, right and centre. Let's not mince our words. There's 2 definite deaths where their hands, where they shoot people in public.
You see why people wouldn't argue with
No, exactly, yeah. So this is in the mid-60s. I flow forward and leave their boxing career slightly. So he's got this list, okay? These men must die, okay? So the police are looking at it, they're going, oh, that'll do. I mean, Nipper Reid, who, by the way, worked for the British Boxing Board of Control after he retired from Scotland, he arrests them, he finds this bit of paper. And anyway...
It says that at the top of the list.
These men must die. Yeah. Now, this apparently, I think it's in Ronnie's handwriting, these men must die. Anyway, very, very, very high on the list is Mickey Duff. Mickey Duff's name is very high on the list, and what he said, I've got a direct quote here from Ronnie. He said, "I should have killed him when I had the chance." They have this incredible association with boxing, you know, but really the reality is they had 6 and 7 fights, and that's absolutely about it. However, one of the things that happens in the mid-60s is a former world light heavyweight champion called Freddie Mills from Bournemouth, who eventually ends up in Soho running a couple of clubs, and he's eventually found dead. And there's a lot of death in this. There's a lot of death in this show.
You tell me beforehand.
Download this one, please, at midnight. Anyway, there's a lot. So this guy, Freddie Mills, is found dead in his car outside his nightclub in Soho, and the bullet goes through his eye. And the autopsy pictures are out there. You can Google them and find them. And it's worked out that he couldn't have actually killed himself. So it's ruled a suicide, but it's doubtful whether he could have done it with the rifle that he was using in the car. And lo and behold, there's always been all these great conspiracy theories that the Krays were putting pressure on him and he should be added to their list of deaths and misdemeanors. He wasn't added to the list of deaths and misdemeanors, and there's enough evidence to suggest that they may have been involved. Well, a journalist, a crime journalist from the 60s, has just written a book in the last 4 or 5 months about the death of Freddie Mills, and he's come up with an incredible claim. He has claimed that Freddie Mills was in such terrible straits that he wanted to kill himself, but he couldn't be sure he would be able to do it, so he hired the Krays for £1,000 to kill himself.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly, moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.